and we're here to talk a little bit about skills and workforce in the climate transition. So I'm just going to do a quick introduction for myself, and then we'll pass it down along so others can introduce themselves. So LinkedIn is here because for the last few years we've been paying attention to what's happening in the world of workforce around climate. So as you know, LinkedIn, we have a little over 1 billion people in the network, and each of them has a profile, and we have job listings, we have a bunch of other information. When you pull all that together, you're actually able to draw insights about how the world of work is changing in pretty much all of its components. And for COP, the main thing we look at is how green skills are changing. Because in the end, for us to be able to reach the climate commitments that we have, and for us to be able to execute a just transition, we need to make sure that there are people to work on these projects and that people can make transitions from carbon-intensive industries in a just way into the green economy and do so successfully. And that comes down to skills, to what you're actually able to do. So by way of quick introduction, for the last few years, we have observed that the number of people in the world who have green skills is in fact increasing. It's increasing at about 7% per year. However, the demand for green skills, the number of jobs being posted for all the projects that we're here talking about here at COP, that's growing at more like 12%. So obviously those two numbers don't line up very well. We've got a long way to go to get to the place where we have enough people to make sure that we don't slow any of these vital projects down. Basically, we need to be training about twice as many people as we're training right now, whether it be a complete new job or a new skill within an existing job. So we are here to see if we can make this conference, LinkedIn is here to make sure that this becomes part of the way the negotiators and the way the companies, the way the governments are thinking about this green transition. Because we think it's possible not only to create a great transition plan to using green energy, renewables, thinking about changing the built environment, but at the same time think about how to make sure that people have what they need to participate in that economy. So we're hoping, and we made some progress this year, that this year and the next couple of COPs will begin to see this become something which is part of the way all of us think about addressing climate change. So that's what LinkedIn is doing here, and I figured I would just sort of walk down the line and say, so what brings you to COP, and what are you hoping to get out of it yourselves? Maddie, we'll start with you. And while you're doing it, if you can introduce yourself and where you're coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. My name's Maddie. I study software engineering and maths at Monash University. I'm also the president of the Monash Energy Club, which I think is one of the big reasons bringing me here to COP. It's you notice like a lot of disillusionment with youth at COP, and I think there's a few reasons for that. The resolutions don't often match the recommendations. There can be a lot of negative results, and sometimes it can feel like a platform for certain world leaders to undermine climate action rather than uplift it. And I think one of the reasons bringing me to COP then is to kind of tell the stories of the really passionate and driven people that are here doing a lot of good work. And that's really exciting to me. I think the other reason I'm here is just a personal reason. I want to understand what's going on in the world, and I want to understand the context of decarbonization and, especially, access and equity barriers for developing countries. Yeah, that's so it's kind of twofold, personal and also in my role as at the Monash Energy Club.
Great. Sarah.
Hello, Alan. My name is Sarah Broadbent. I am here representing at COP, IFM Investors. It's a pleasure to be here with you and wonderful young people leaders like Maddie and Alan. Thank you to the Australian Pavilion for having us. IFM Investors is here at COP. We are a global pension fund investor. So we were established around 30 years ago by some of Australia's biggest industry super funds to invest on behalf of working people in major infrastructure assets to protect and grow their retirement savings. This was a real act of foresight Oh, a bit louder. Thank you. Love that. Thank you. Very helpful tip. We invest on behalf of working people to protect and grow their retirement savings. We were established by some of Australia's largest industry super funds, and now we invest on behalf of pension funds and investors all over the world for around 120 million people. And so as long-term system investors, we have our number one obligation is to deliver returns for those working people, but we know that long-term returns mean we have to think about system challenges and systemic issues like climate and how they affect returns. So we do work on policy settings that can let us invest in those major areas where capital's needed, like energy transition, like climate action. So we've done a series of pieces of work on Australian energy transition. Just last month we released a blueprint on how we can invest in the UK energy transition, and workforce is of course critical there. So really keen to have a conversation about what that looks and feels like for jobs and skills, and thank you for having me.
Mm-hmm. And Alan.
Thanks for having us, Alan, and welcome everyone. By day, I run a group for a global engineering company called Worley that effectively delivers, demonstrates and helps commercialise technologies, mainly in the resources sector. But my night gig, so to speak, is working for Mission Innovation, the coordinator of the Net Zero Industries mission, which focuses on how we apply and help scale and demonstrate technologies for decarbonisation of heavy industry. We've just lost. No, there we go. That's what brings me to COP, and the reason for that is that the scale of that challenge is just completely unprecedented in peacetime. The amount of people that are actually required to do anything in technology is far more important usually than the technology itself. And what we use events like COP for is to actually build those relationships, to actually start enhance that network, to find out what kind of concessions and what sort of collaborations that we can actually each make in order to actually achieve and advance that big goal of how we accelerate the deployment of industrial decarbonisation.
It's an amazing thing that I kind of look around as I'm walking around COP, and I know that everyone has a different goal or thing they're trying to achieve. So thank you for sharing yours. It's great to hear. Alan, let's stick with you. I'm interested in what the climate transition means for the workers of Australia. What does it mean in terms of how they need to change and what we need to do differently?
Thanks for that. I'm almost going to go philosophical on that answer, and I'm going to quote you, paraphrase you anyway,
Okay.
because it's very easy to get lost and think that it's a binary switch. Oh, I'm in a climate job or I'm not in a climate job. You once said that if you think your job is not going to be impacted by technology, you're wrong. Okay, and that's true equally, if not more so, when it actually comes to sustainability and decarbonisation. So it's really a matter of, it's easy to actually have those conversations about, well, these are the absolute green jobs. You know, I am now doing, because we need twice as many environmental permits to actually be approved, or we're doing something that is heavily focused or primarily focused on a decarbonisation technology that's being developed or commercialised. But then you've got to start saying, well, where's that fringe? How much impact is there going to be on people in all sorts of jobs? And that we need to make sure that, and we do put a focus on this in the mission, of asking these questions to each of the key stakeholders who are going to be involved. Because government and regulators are going to be doing different things. They're going to be taking different types of risks. They're going to be asked to do a different type of solution and different type of challenge there. Different types of products are going to be sold in marketplaces that might need to be subsidised. But the engineers are going to be doing something different. They're working with technologies, different technical risks, different commercial models. The banks, that's a massive one, and we want to dive into that as well, because all of a sudden we're approving and taking on project risks and ensuring projects that are fundamentally different in a different commercial environment, as well as technical issues. So everyone to a certain degree is going to be saying, well, what change is going to be in it for me? What we really want to challenge out there is, how do we help? And when we actually take that attitude of each of us saying, well, what am I going to do to help in this major challenge? That's when we can actually start finding those opportunities for each person to identify where their change is going to come.
And that's what we find in LinkedIn's data as well, that there are many fully new jobs which will be created. But much more impactful are the changes within existing jobs to do new and different things. So good examples are carbon accounting. How do you manage a supply chain in a world where you need to think about scope 3 emissions? Those are roles that exist today, but need to be done differently in the world of decarbonization. So it's huge. It's actually a great tee up though for you, Sarah. So finance, like when you think about the connection between climate and finance, do you start with your own workforce, the people who are making choices in the world of finance?
We are really conscious of both our own workforce as investors and the workforce that will be needed for the future. I think I hear you absolutely, Alan, that there is an absolute transformation happening of all types of jobs that are going to be affected by the transformation we are going to go through as we decarbonise our economy and as we transition our energy supply. But I think for us and the type of opportunities we see to invest, it's also, we just cannot go past the scale of the workforce growth we have to have, and they're going to have to go hand in hand. It's such a significant challenge.
Yeah.
Like we know we're going to need 32,000 additional electricians by 2030, another 85,000 by 2050. And I think LinkedIn's work is so spot on in your sort of identification of energy and finance as those two key sectors. So for us, we bring a kind of major infrastructure investor lens because that's where we want to invest, and that brings us to look at the major infrastructure workforce, and that's where we'll invest, and that's where the sort of workforce at our assets, and then also we're in our own workforce, the sort of finance workforce. Yes, it's a different type of set of assets than many infrastructure investors have looked at before, and that goes to the challenges here. And the challenges that our work is looking at in our energy transition blueprints. It takes different types of investment models to invest in energy. So, for example, the investment levers that we can work with government on to ensure we're delivering appropriate risk-adjusted returns for working people's retirement savings, which is our number one obligation, are different the ways we might work with government on more traditional assets, like airports or ports or higher carbon intensity assets like roads. So that needs some of the core finance skill sets. We absolutely need those, but we also, those finance experts are learning, to work with different policy levers and interfaces with government. To develop new policy models that can help us invest differently and in different jurisdictions.
Interesting. Yeah, it's definitely a different... I know that, my understanding anyway is that in the finance industry, it's important to build up a team of people who know the space in which you're investing. And we're just investing in new spaces in these cases. So it has to impact the workforce that you even have in your own office, making things happen.
Absolutely. And the core to that is really new models of collaboration with government. And that goes to our work on our blueprints, really. And that goes to, I think, what the finance sector can bring to COP, which is what are we learning in new areas of opportunity for investment, and how can those insights help support decision makers and leaders here in COP to progress some of the big decisions here around finance.
So obviously, and this is what we talk about at LinkedIn as well, we have a question of not only demand, so how do we find the people we need, but also supply, who is going to come do these jobs, who's going to make the transitions necessary to take on these new roles. So Maddie, I wanted you to talk a little bit about your own experience entering the world of working in climate transition, and also get your thoughts about what barriers you think exist for people, and especially young people, entering this field.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of barriers exist. I think that youth want to feel pride in their jobs, and I can definitely say that for myself. It's a big part of that these days is climate change, and knowing that the company you work for is someone you can be proud of. In terms of youth actually getting into the workforce and developing these green skills, you know, I talk to lecturers at the university who are developing content as quick as possible. I talk to employers who are, you know, looking to engage with students as much as possible. I talk to students that want these green skills, and what I gather is that there's a massive disconnect. It's not cohesive, and the sector, like the energy sector at the very least, and I think this is true probably for a lot of other sectors, is evolving too fast for traditional education. I think studying IT has been interesting because IT is somewhere where we always say, you know, 5 years into your degree and you leave the the university and nothing you have learned is relevant anymore. That's pretty much how IT goes, and I think increasingly that's how the green workforce and sustainability is going as well. It changes so often, and so I think that inevitably there needs to be some kind of not move away from traditional education, but incorporating other forms of education. So skills and competencies-based education into educating youth to join green jobs.
And it's interesting, the relationship between employers and government and education. So I'm curious, Alan or Sarah, when you're working with employers or when you're considering investments, you're working in the missions, what are you hearing from employers regarding what they expect from the world of higher education or traditional education? And what do they think they have to do themselves?
I do a fair bit of work with researchers from universities, and researchers constantly have a metric for themselves to actually make sure that they're contributing to the educational programs. At the moment, I suppose one of the biggest barriers for that is some of the metrics we use to actually measure success in that space, because a lot of effort is put into how many PhDs, for example, that they can actually claim that they've generated based on a technology or a research field that they're working on, more so than the true scale of impact that we're talking about for the traditional mainstream education program for all of the engineers that go through. But it will filter through, because the work and the motivations that get that research lead or that professor excited naturally do flow into their education campaigns. You know, that old quote, "What interests my boss fascinates me." So all of a sudden, if you've got a professor who wants to brag about his research and talk about his going and these are his publications, that does naturally motivate the kind of work that they're actually teaching and push through. But that isn't necessarily a formalised structure of actually drive that kind of advancement or that kind of agenda through those programs. I suppose I'm not really the right person to talk about how universities motivate their actual education programs to stay updated. I know that some of them have some absolutely wonderful marketing programs in Australia, talking about their relevance to the real world and that helps them get the money they need and the student load they need to be able to deliver on that promise. It's just how well they actually translate that in operations rather than saying they're going to do it.
Got it. And Sarah, did you want to add anything?
Well, I think I'd also be really interested, as I was saying, I think LinkedIn's approach to scoping that concept of green jobs and green skills for the future as not just the hard green skills, but sectors affected, and your particular focus on that energy transformation sector, energy sector and finance sector. Both of those are sectors where women are largely underrepresented in senior roles. And so their representation is growing, but like many sort of sectors, that is not in senior roles. So I'm really interested, Alan, in your experience, mine in finance and yours in sort of minerals and mining sector, on any sort of useful or positive methods you've seen of helping remove barriers for women in those sectors. And I suppose after that, Maddie, it'd be interesting to hear, as a young woman in STEM at uni, what you think is attracting young women to the sector.
Do you want me to go first? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Let's
that's
chat.
We could probably dominate the entire conversation, but one quick example, absolutely critical, is visibility. As you say, if you haven't got a role model to actually draw upon, to be motivated by, the amount of people that you need to motivate to actually follow through. We're not looking to try and pick 10 great women leaders to actually try and influence any industry. We're looking to actually transform what that pipeline looks like of people who are actually moving into those industries. Mining has long been dominated as a male-only career. There are some absolutely fantastic women who have succeeded, who've been there longer than I have in the industry. I could drop names left, right and centre, probably not the right place. Some of my colleagues are in that pool as well. But without a strong pipeline, because we're not talking about just seeding in. That is one of the tools we certainly want to use, because that visibility is key to actually help motivate. But it's really our goal is how do we drive the pipeline to get enough diversity, not just in females, but in all aspects of diversity, in how we think, where we come from, where their backgrounds are, to actually build up a massive pool of people. Because whether it's the amount of critical minerals we need or it's the amount of people working on sustainability projects, we know we need somewhere between sort of 3 and 10 times as many people as we currently have in those industries. So we've got to deal with popularity, we've got to deal with motivation, and we've got to deal with visibility of a career path that actually show that it's possible. So it's not, I'm fighting in a job or a career that won't take me anywhere. They actually see that there's a goal that can be achieved, has been done by others, and therefore is a path that's worthy of risking their life and their career to take.
Mm-hmm. So, Maddie, this is a great question. When did you discover the connection between the things you were studying and climate? And were those things? What can we do to basically to make that connection, that visibility, better, as a way of building up those huge pipelines of talent we need across all these industries?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, it's taken a long time. I started in chemistry because for me, something like software engineering, even mathematics, really, it didn't seem like a pathway that would fit my identity as a woman, and that's a hard thing. I think Alan talking about visibility, I think that's kind of the crux of it, really. What I saw in university and in people studying software engineering, it was men, and it was men that I didn't identify with on a personal level, and I think that it took a long time for me to get a bit older and kind of pull myself away from those biases, I guess, and yeah, to end up moving forward with that. In terms of how I kind of moved into IT, it was really like, to me it was what skills do I want to develop, and I think honestly, when I was in my science degree, I was scrolling through LinkedIn, and I was looking at all the different jobs and what they what they needed out of graduates or students or whatever, and seeing that it was not necessarily a specific degree, but it was a lot of kind of problem solving, and that's how I figured out that I wanted to do a degree in problem solving, and that's what I think my degrees are. Yeah, so I think visibility is extremely important for women, and focusing less in secondary school on, it's a specific degree to get you to a specific destination versus it's the skills you want to develop as a person and what you want to contribute to the workforce. I think it's important to focus on that.
It's interesting. One of the great things about the LinkedIn data is that it shows that basically jobs are made up of constellations, if you will, of skills, and there's a lot of overlap between them. So the thing you might develop for this particular career might also be applicable for a green career over here, so that basically you can make the transition from one to another as a way of building up the kind of pipeline of green talent that we actually need down the line. So I asked you that question, but I was curious, do you have any questions for Sarah? I figured we would mix it up a little bit.
Yeah, I do have a question for Sarah. In terms of, being a climate finance at like a commercial level, what brings you to COP, and also what is the role of climate finance in this whole transformation of the jobs and skills sector?
Excellent question. I thought you were going to ask me about what brought me to climate finance, and I was going to have to, personally, in my career, and I was going to have a deep moment of reckoning.
Oh, you can do that too.
Personal. No. It's a critical COP in relation to finance as they grapple with the new quantified goal. For investors, particularly for us as a pension capital investor, as I said, our number one obligation is to deliver long-term returns, but for our particular type of capital, we know that requires us to think about systemic challenges like climate and how they affect long-term returns, and that's why we feel that collaborating with governments on policy settings that enable us to deliver long-term returns is a really important thing. It's really clear that, as Alan said, the scale of capital to tackle both energy transition and climate action is huge. The number being used around COP is around 5 trillion, both for adaptation and climate action. Right now, as governments grapple with that and the mix of public and private capital that will be needed to deal with that, IFM is really here to share the insights that we have from the work we have done, always grounded in how we can deliver returns for working people's retirement savings, but on that interface of while we are driving to returns for working people, how do we get policies right that can enable private capital to be in the right spots in that mix of public and private capital to achieve that 5 trillion being in the right places. So there's big calls, big decisions for governments to make in the negotiating rooms over there, and that is their obligation as democratically elected representatives of the people. But we're here to say there are insights and lessons in how governments and investors can collaborate and what those tools and levers are to get capital into the right spots to make sure, that long-term issue that can affect investment returns can be tackled.
And I mean, personally, I would love to see some of that $5 trillion, maybe just a little tiny bit of it, go into the world of supporting the kind of human capital development that we're talking about here. I don't think you would necessarily do, maybe you would, but do a formalized structure. But it would be great if it were part of every conversation about how do we invest in a climate transformative project. Because in the end, companies do need to play a big role, as do investors. Joe, do you have a question for Alan?
A question?
Oh, Sarah, do you have a question for Alan?
Well, yes, but I suppose is there anything you've seen around? I'm not sure when you arrived, Alan, but anything you've seen on the ground so far that's delivered particular insights? Or I only arrived last night, so
did I.
No, I know. Anything you're most looking forward to?
As I said, the big opportunity of COP, and Maddie and I were talking about this just before. COPs, to the people on the outside, look like a massive junket. But what COP really is, and this sounds like an ad for LinkedIn, but it isn't. It just shows you why LinkedIn is relevant.
I didn't do any of this.
I know you didn't. It's fine. These are opportunities for us to actually build relationships. This is a dodgy one. Would you mind? It's the opportunity for us to actually identify people who are going to be either kindred spirits who are aligned in what you're trying to achieve, to build those relationships, okay? We can have a Teams meeting, we can reach out with an email hoping someone responds, but you'll turn up at any of these events around COP and you know the people are there with a similar agenda to what you're going for. They're either wanting to learn about it, they're actually wanting to meet people who are like-minded. That is your opportunity to actually build a connection, to let them know who you are, and then you're not looking to buy, you're not looking to sell to them, but you're looking for ways that you can help each other. And if we actually use that as a motivation to say, what can I do to help you? What can you do to help me? And I'm going to take that opportunity with Alan before he leaves COP as well, because there's so many things that we can do. But that is what this is about. On the ground, together, in person, like-minded, then naturally grouping us into little forums such as this that gives you agendas and topics where you have common interests. That is the seed for where the collaboration and the relationships of the future are born.
Before you give up the microphone, do you have a question for Maddie?
I do actually have a question for Maddie, and I put her on notice, so this isn't a surprise. One of those questions, and I know Alan's raised it, I've raised it, and Sarah's raised it as well. The gap at the moment between the amount of work that needs to be done and the amount of people that are actually there to be able to do it. We need to not just focus on the jobs that are attractive in the green space, but for example, putting my metals hat on, critical minerals are absolutely essential. The amount of steel, the amount of green concrete, the amount of copper we're going to need, the amount of aluminium we're going to need, they all have to be green. It's harder to get financed and there's technologies that have to be developed. But we also need engineers. And to actually bring an engineer into an unpopular industry, how do we motivate and find ways to get that pipeline of people entering, not just at the base, but through mid-career transitions and all the way up to highlighting senior roles at the top? How do we build that pipeline by allowing people to come across and realise you're doing good? You're actually helping something that is incredibly worthy, even if it isn't in an industry that normally traditionally sounds green. And I say this because there are fantastic opportunities in the oil and chemical industry to actually help with decarbonisation. But it's one that most people wouldn't even consider that there's an opportunity in it. Even in AI, there's enormous opportunities to help us with the decarbonisation challenge. Spoke at a conference in June this year, and they're all going, but what have we got to do with sustainability? They just didn't naturally find that opportunity. So my question is, where do you think, how do we get those motivations to show that there's not just a small amount of jobs, but there's an enormous amount of good you can do in lots of places if you're willing to try?
Yeah, I mean, extremely important. I think it's kind of ironic because you have these, passionate change makers and very talented people who want to go to new and emergent industries when there are, traditional industries that desperately need change. And the other thing is, you like in these traditional industries that need change, you don't just want talent, you want green talent. You want people with these skills. But the people with those skills, they tend to go to, say, renewables or something like that. I think, I don't have the answer.
The glamorous ones.
The glamorous ones, yes. The new and shiny. And, I mean, yeah, I'm a victim of that. I work in renewables. And I think I don't have the answer for you. I think that what's really important from my point of view as somebody who talks to a lot of students about, renewables and decarbonisation and everything, is that we see a lot of greenwashing from traditional sectors, and the thing about people with green talent is that I think they have the skills to see greenwashing and to understand when it's happening. And so I think what's not greenwashing is companies taking genuine risks and making sustainability a part of the conversation at every level, not just, at a high level global campaign kind of, level. So I think what that means from current students going into the workforce is seeing really ambitious companies that are competing for these, decarbonisation targets, taking risks. And then as an employee, what I want to see is sustainability a part of the conversation at work, at all times. And I think that's what's, that's the only thing that's going to get you the green talent you're looking for.
But not just in the conversation, but more importantly in the actions.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that I think that goes to the risk taking I'm talking about. I think that's really important.
So let's just ask one more question for us, and if we have time, we can answer questions from people in the audience. Can you recommend a great example of somebody who's doing something right in the world of green skills, green jobs, workforce preparedness. Are there any great examples you think we should repeat? So I'll start. Nathaniel right here runs an organization which is teaching green and entrepreneurial skills and in Australia, right? So it's been running for 7 years. It's called Future Minds. Please go ahead, say a couple more words.
Thanks so much, Alan. I appreciate the shout out. Hey everyone, my name's Nathaniel. I'm the CEO of Future Minds Network, and as Alan said, we've been on this journey where we've seen there's this huge passion for young people to want to move into these spaces of social impact, to want to move into these spaces of climate change, but they often come in and feel like the sector is not ready for them. They feel like there are so many jobs, but employers are looking for different skills. And so part of our challenge over the past 7 years has been looking at, well, how do we bridge these barriers and gaps? And so we've been working on really developing these green and entrepreneurship skills for them to jump in with these employers and look at what the future looks like. And so that's things like complex problem solving, it's things like an innovation mindset, it's things like public speaking, and it's just been, it's been a journey of bridging that gap.
So very much like the kinds of skills that you were talking about, Maddie, these the ones that seem to apply to solving a lot of these kinds of problems in the world of STEM and engineering.
Yes.
It sounds fantastic. And these kinds of projects where entrepreneurs are taking on the responsibility for training are a big part of it. What about others?
I think I want to mention an example that's not necessarily from sustainability, but I think it's really important. I forgot to mention it earlier, but it's actually in the Green Skills Report, and that's coding boot camps in the IT world. I think it's in IT, you want to go into a software development role, you do your degree, and that's the absolute baseline. You need to self-educate a lot, and there is that opportunities to do that. If you want to go into a new language that you haven't done before, often people do like a boot camp, like a quick couple of weeks or a couple of months education on a specific topic. I think that's really important for the future, and I don't think, at least in the energy sector, those opportunities aren't there for people. Like, for example, you have at the moment in Australia, because of the speed of change of the energy industry, we have a need for jobs called grid connection engineers, and that requires a really good knowledge of energy grid policy. That's something that anyone coming out of university doesn't have. They probably don't even know where to start with it. And it's a graduate level job, and if we want people in those jobs, if we want people with the skills for those jobs, we need to be able to educate them in a way that's really dynamic, not like traditional education, which takes years to catch up. We need to be able to educate people quickly and as is needed.
Interesting. Yeah, it's a great model.
I'm going to throw in one that isn't actually a current thing that's being done, but I'm going to throw it in the spirit of pivoting, because there are some things that are being done that if we pivoted them slightly could actually impact that. When I went through my PhD, there was a thing called an APRA, an Australian Priority Research Area, where you'd got a certain amount of grant to do your PhD, but if you focused on one of the areas that was really important to the national economy, you got extra money. And that motivated a lot of people to actually focus on the things that were important to the government of the day. So what if we threw out something, and this is not necessarily an Australian conversation, but any government, what if there were tax concessions, income tax concessions, for people actually to be moving into the industries that we need them to move in? We already do it, for example, in our visa programs for immigration in lots of countries,
True.
to actually pick key skills and key industries, but that's stealing from each other. Why don't we move it one step back? Move it back into where you're doing your training, where you're actually working in those industries, to actually motivate people to steer and move and want to move into the industries where we actually need to build that pipeline of skills.
Sarah? And you can take the mulligan.
I think I'll try and stick to my knitting.
Oh, right,
And,
exactly.
Make sure I'm here as the voice of
Sure thing.
finance rather than pretend I'm an expert on the best skill development pathways there are.
Well, so
It's very impressive to hear and see amazing people like
Oh.
Nathan and others who are,
for sure.
and Maddie. I mean, it's extremely impressive.
Yeah,
I don't
agreed.
like people were not thinking like this when I was at university. They were not.
Yeah.
There is just no doubt
Yep.
that the transformation is.
It is fantastic to be at COP at a time where we have to
Isn't it?
think about these practical things. So,
Yeah.
All right, fantastic. So do people out here have questions for any of the folks on the stage? Please. Thank you for passing the microphone.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm Sina from WWF. First of all, thank you for all the interesting insights. And you talked a lot about developing skills and training employees and also hiring the different talent. And I was just wondering, if you are in a position, for example, that is in that transition change and also changing a little bit, to what degree do you think it's the employee's responsibility to equip oneself with those kind of skills, and to what degree it would be also the employee's responsibility to train the employees for the changes ahead, and then what kind of resources you think might be most useful? I think we have one great example here, but maybe also just in general. Thank you.
Alan, you want to give it a try?
Thanks. I'd say first and foremost, any organisation actually has a responsibility to its shareholders to actually make sure that they are skilling themselves and they're prepared to manage all of the risks they have to develop. So that primary focus is on the employer, but the opportunity is for the employee. Okay? When we start talking about skills gaps between job availability and available supply, okay, for people who want to earn more, people who want to make a bigger impact, people who actually want to make something, create something, be someone more, that is where the opportunity lives for the individual. So one's going to happen, the other one is really going to be down to the entrepreneurial spirit inside individuals. So we want to encourage both.
I would only add to this that employers, in a lot of things today, realize that it actually may make more sense to hold on to an existing employee rather than bring in a new employee from the outside. Because if you're talking about a small transition, like taking someone who's already managing supply chain and making them able to do so with a bunch of considerations around climate and scope 3 emissions, that's actually a relatively small leap, and you can retain an employee who already knows how to work within the system, who already is part of the company family or whatever you might want to call it. And there are also cost differences between the two. One of the things which is really interesting about green skills right now is that if you have green skills, and this is from the LinkedIn data, if you have green skills, you're being hired at a far higher rate than the people who don't have green skills, because the demand is already so strong for people who have those things. So it becomes extremely competitive and expensive for a company to hire brand new talent from the outside, because you're competing with every other company who needs that small amount of external talent. So whether a company considers it a responsibility, they might consider it a cost savings to be able to go with training rather than going with acquisition of new talent. Other questions?
Thanks, Alan. Thank you so much, Madeleine. You mentioned coding boot camps. My name is Matthias Mühlbaum. I'm the co-founder and COO of 1.5. So the 1.5 Academy is mentioned in the LinkedIn Green Skills report that came out last Thursday. So thanks for the shout out. We sort of believe in this upskilling and reskilling approach around net zero and corporate sustainability skills as well. That's a lot more agile, right? We have an 8-week course versus a 2-year master's degree or a 3-year bachelor's or 4 years. Based on the fact that I think early in the discussion they were talking about how 5 years after doing an IT degree, all the things that you'd learned from year 1 to 5 are all completely refreshed in a fast-moving space. And we're seeing that absolutely in sustainability. So anyway, thanks for the shout out, and appreciate allowing me to pitch quickly on 1.5 Academy. I'm actually based in New York, so I'm a little bit further removed from Australia. One of the things that we've talked about in our research is this idea of embedded sustainability. And the idea is taking sustainability out of the sustainability team, right? Given we're seeing this trend of sustainability teams really being streamlined and becoming very resource light, to put it diplomatically. And yet we have these large net zero goals for transforming organizations. So the idea of embedded sustainability is to push sustainability skills, or green skills, throughout the organization. So you have your experts in different functions of business units like supply chain, procurement, IT, finance, but they now have the context of the energy transition or the climate transition, right? Scope 1, 2, 3, for example. So I'm wondering, in the Australian context, have you seen this trend in companies that you've worked in, interacted with, partnered with before? This idea of embedding sustainability into, beyond the sustainability team. We'd love to hear your thoughts and observations. Thank you.
Well, I can speak for the company I work for, Worley. We actually have a program of passports. So we actually want all of our employees to recognise that they all have a role to play in sustainability. And I don't think we've published see if my colleagues are here, I'm not sure we've published a passport in the last 6 months, but we actually have a rolling program to actually teach people about the topics that are important, to actually see, well, these are opportunities for you. How are you going to get involved? How are you going to use this language? How are you going to use these skills and learnings? It doesn't give them the skills. These aren't training programs of the calibre that you're discussing, but they are teasers to show them that it's important, and that goes back to that visibility question. And it is opening the doors to say, work with us to actually explore how you are going to make an impact. And that's vital. We're not forcing horses to drink water here. We're showing them where the water is, we're telling them we're going to support it, but we actually need both the horse and the person who's providing the water to actually want that to happen, want that change to happen.
This is the one. I'll look just briefly. As a global infrastructure equity investor, sustainable investment practice is obviously critical to our business. As Maddie said, though, of course, doing that credibly and with integrity and ensuring we are not practicing greenwashing is also critically important, and so that is just fundamental to our practice and how that's structured in the business. So that is not my core area in our business, but that is the sort of set of principles we bring to how we do it. So we have we've got a series of global offices that have sustainability teams. We have sustainability presence in global offices and in our head office. So I don't know if that answers the question, but happy to chat with you about it in more detail.
And because every role, sorry, just one quickly, because every role is going to eventually include a collection of green skills, I think the overall, that idea of bringing awareness for green skills into all the roles inside a company will make more and more sense over time. So I think it's a good thing, and I think 2 or 3 years from now, I think you're going to see it easier and easier to be adopted. So I'm going to go back here first.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for a great discussion. Ian McGill from the University of New South Wales. Maddie, I do actually teach grid connection, amongst other things. I'm just sort of interested in and perhaps I think you might all have a view on it. So you did IT at the University of New South Wales. The biggest engineering school by far is computer science engineering, and machine learning and AI is a big part of putting students there. Our experience has been that if you have, say, machine learning skills, that doesn't necessarily make you very helpful in doing energy analytics because you don't have the domain expertise, right? You don't actually get the underlying energy system. And so colleagues and I are sort of scratching our heads saying, how do we take all these great students doing CSE and IT with really nice skills in machine learning and data analytics and skill them up so they can actually help us solve energy challenges? And so really interested in your thoughts on how you bring people across. And I'm sure there's similar things with bringing finance people across and across firms as well.
I was just going to say, Maddie's got that sorted. Didn't you say you've got boot camps on that?
I don't have boot camps. There should be though.
Right.
I mean, that's very relevant to me because I work in energy microgrid optimization. I work implementing optimization algorithms, and I think you have to have the interest in it. And I think a lot of people that I go to uni with, they look at me and they think, why the hell are you doing that? They've got no interest in it. I don't know why that is, but I think at Monash University at least, software and computer science are very siloed in terms of the kind of education you get. It's very based. It's very web dev based actually. And even AI, you do a course on AI, you might end up implementing a web app for it. I think that there's so much room for more cross-disciplinary connections between computer science and other fields that I don't see, at least at Monash University. I'm not sure about others, but I don't see it.
Got it. Thank you. Did you want to add something?
Just a very quick one. I think the key here is that people shouldn't consider themselves to be Robinson Crusoe. Okay, it isn't about making sure that one person has that diversity of skills and experience to be able to solve the problem. It's recognising that there are other people that do have those skills and expertise that they should be working with and collaborating with in order to solve those problems, because that's truly where we're going to get the depth of intellectual horsepower. To imagine that someone's going to be an expert in everything that we need for every problem that's going to be combining that and that and that is unrealistic. It is much better for us to be teaching collaboration and how to do that and encouraging collaboration than it is to actually try and achieve the perfect hybrid human that's got all the skills for a particular problem.
And we've definitely seen that working internally at LinkedIn with all of our artificial intelligence projects. We found in general, it's taken us a little while, but we've developed that kind of language and collaboration muscle so that someone who is not knowledgeable in AI but is knowledgeable in a particular area can work very effectively with an AI engineer.
Hi, I'm with the Actuaries Institute in Australia, the geeks who price cyclone insurance and stuff like that. And one of the challenges that we've got is trying to see how to take the skills that we know how to apply to one place and apply them to sustainable issues. So for example, we know how to price risk. You can do that in the energy markets with the risk of the renewables going down, or we know how to evaluate carbon pricing if we know how to do motor pricing and stuff. So my question is, how do you kind of build the sort of the leap where you sort of mutate your skills from where you know how to do one thing into the sustainability space? Because I think there's a lot of professions that could add value to this process if they could just have the imagination to be able to apply the skills they're using in one place to the sustainability issues, which is another potential talent pool. I wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
I'm not trying to dominate, but one of the things in terms of getting anyone to lean in and do something that isn't their knitting is actually usually money. If you find someone who's motivated and who's got some spare time and altruistic, great, but how do we actually start budgeting and planning to actually pay for and get quality in the skills in the collaboration that we want? And given we don't know the answer, how do we actually set those people who are budgeting that money into the mindset of it's okay to fail? Because if we're learning how to do something, it isn't any different to research, it isn't any different to technology development. There's a pipeline of things, some of them are going to work, some of them are not going to work, and there is no blame from learning that it's not going to work and moving on. They're the two big things. Make sure you spend the money, make sure you're willing to risk failing when you spend that money would be the two big drivers I'd suggest.
It isn't part of the great insight that it is some of it is existing skill sets applied to new challenges, just applied new ways. And I think that's your point, isn't it? Yeah.
There's a huge ocean of talent where the skills to solve one problem can be applied here, but you've got to get people to make that leap to see how to take what they're doing here and apply it over there. I just use like pricing that we do for risk. That's completely applicable to carbon markets, energy, anything else, but getting the people to move is the challenge and getting them to see it.
Well, I mean, yes, exactly. And just to say, we're here at COP. We know we need $5 trillion for this challenge. There couldn't be more of an imperative for our business that is absolutely delivering returns for working people's retirement savings. But we hear young people saying it's a very appealing place to work. The imperative seems to be there. Just as an anecdote, we have an extraordinary former actuary in our business, working on this work with us. Shout out Ramona Merrick if you're watching the stream. So yes, as LinkedIn have pointed out, it's not just these new emerging skill sets, it's applying the existing skills in the right places where they're needed. So shout out to actuaries and their role.
So anybody else have questions? All right, so one of the things which I think is a great takeaway from this conversation in general is this idea that there are people out there who want to take jobs in the climate transition, and they can't find an effective way in. And we find that to be true with LinkedIn's data as well, that people, especially young professionals, don't see clear paths which lead from where they are into working in the world of climate. So there's a major visibility angle that we need to be able to fix. And that visibility also needs to happen inside companies. So that basically, if you are trying to make a transition internally, people see that as an opportunity to be able to do something different once they're actually inside an organization. So let's see. Actually, this is almost exactly 1 hour. So congratulations, everybody. And thank you for coming. Thank you to the panel. Thank you for joining us. And if you like, you can go to LinkedIn, and if you want to see that Green Skills report, as well as some of the success stories and the case studies inside, you can just download it from LinkedIn, from our economic graph page. With that, thanks everybody.
Yes, I know Ramona extremely well. She took over.
Last year we gave you a megawatt game. Have you played it?
I wake up at 2:30 this morning. We have a monthly meeting.
This year I'm representing international youth.
That's good.
I don't know your sense of worship there, but
Great music. I'll tell Ramona I saw you.